This video today is the fourth and final video in the topic, the end of the Plains Indians. And in this video today, we're going to be looking at specifically the end of the Indian way of life. We're going to be looking at what factors led to the eventual defeat of the Plains Indians and what factors led to the destruction of the traditional plain Indian way of life and the destruction of their culture. Although we're going to be talking through a lot of information at quite a rapid speed during this video today, none of this information is new. Really, all the information we're going to look at today is a nice summary of everything we've looked at in the American West topic, and it's just summing everything up and bringing it together and showing how everything we've learned relates to how Indian life was destroyed. So although it looks like there's loads of information, there's actually not. It's just a summary of everything we sort of learn about the other types of people, and really I'm just sort of doing the thinking for you in linking it to the destruction of Indian culture. Alright, let's have a look then. So, manifest destiny as a factor that contributed towards the destruction of Indian culture. Well, the Americans believed that it was their God-given right to occupy all of the US, and this was their justification for treating badly those who stood in their way, such as the Plains Indians. So, manifest destiny enabled them to justify Indian wars, and it also justified how they mistreated the Chinese who were brought in to build the railways. If you think back to the video on the railways, we said that immigrant workers, such as Chinese immigrants, were brought in to help build the railways, but they were badly treated. And manifest destiny helps to explain why these Chinese workers were badly treated, because the Americans thought that they had the power of God behind them and that they could treat them badly. The end of this US Civil War was a factor then. So the American Civil War ended in 1865, and from 1865 the attention of the government was then turned to the West. Soldiers were available, and money was available for the building of the railways. Ex-soldiers and freed slaves were looking to build a new life on the Great Plains, so they sort of became homesteaders, ranchers, cowboys, that sort of thing, helping to settle the West and squeeze the Indians off of the Great Plains eventually. Okay, so government policy. The US government supported the miners, homesteaders and ranchers. There was never enough money spent supporting the Indians on reservations or allowing them to live in traditional ways. This obviously led to conflict, and the usual solution was to send in the US Army to deal with the Indians. That was the usual solution to that. So the US government was supporting the non-Indians who were settling the plains and taking away the old hunting grounds off the Plains Indians. So they gave free land grants to homesteaders, and this encouraged homesteaders to settle on the plains, and this made the living space of the Plains Indians much smaller. Okay, so homesteading. Homesteaders wanted land for farming. Land used to be hunting lands of the Plains Indians, but because homesteaders wanted farming land, the living space of the Plains Indians was cut down. The homesteaders also demanded the protection of the US government, and they were the driving force behind the US Army moving the Indians onto the reservations to protect the homesteaders and keep the Indians separate from the homesteaders. Okay, so cattle ranching. Ranchers wanted land to graze cattle, and cattle drives also scared away buffalo. Cattle drives also, wanting land for cattle ranching also cut down the Plains Indians' living space, and some cattle ranchers demanded that the US Army should deal with the Plains Indians. Okay, let's have a look at gold and gold mining. The discovery of gold brought thousands of miners onto the Plains Indian lands. So they were settling and travelling across lands that belonged to the Plains Indians. Mining towns also took up lots of land, and this helped to settle the West. And the development of mines broke existing treaties such as the Fort Laramie Treaty that was broken when gold was discovered in the Black Hills. This brought the miners into direct conflict with the Indians. Okay, some more factors then. The US Army, while they were too powerful for the Indians to fight, there were too many soldiers for the Indians to deal with. The Indians were in much fewer numbers than the US Army. The system of forts gave the US Army bases to control the Great Plains, and winter campaigns, fighting through the winter, helped to defeat the Plains Indians. The organisation of the Indians, what did that mean then? So the Indian organisation meant they were never able to fight long campaigns against the US Army, as they had families to feed and protect. They were lacking the organisation for long campaigns and prolonged warfare. The building of the Transcontinental Railway, what did this mean? Well, builders of railroads financed work by selling land to homesteaders, so this encouraged homesteaders to live on the plains. So the plains were being settled by these homesteaders, and they were taking living space away from the Plains Indians. So railways wanted to force the Indians out so they could sell this land to homesteaders, and railroads also brought buffalo hunters to the plains. So special excursion trains were set up where people could travel along the railroad and shoot buffalo. This helped to explain the destruction of the buffalo, and the destruction of the buffalo led to the destruction of Indian culture. So, we've got the railroad, that's leading to more buffalo being killed through more buffalo hunters, that's leading to the destruction of the buffalo, and that's leading to the Indians becoming dependent on government handouts because it's destroyed their economy. So one thing leads to another. Railroads also were a way of shipping buffalo hides to eastern tanneries. Also, railroads were able to supply US Army bases with men and supplies. Okay. So let's have a look at these final 4 factors then. Indian warfare. They fought a different way to the US Army. They were unwilling to suffer heavy casualties and couldn't replace their losses. They couldn't fight the army on equal terms. On equal terms, and usually they were less well armed than the army. Every soldier had a rifle, but not every Indian, but every Indian soldier did, and army units often had artillery and Gatling guns. So, the government system of reservations. The reservations kept the Indians away from settlers. They allowed the government to control the Indians. No weapons meant they were dependent on government handouts because they couldn't fight back. They had no power to resist. Sometimes the Indians tried to protest against the US Army, but protests were often stopped by taking away food rations, because the Indians couldn't be self-sufficient and were totally dependent on the US Army. The destruction of the buffalo. The buffalo provided the Indians with the necessities for life. They needed meat for cooking, skin for clothes and teepee, dung for fuel, sinews for threads and things like that. They were totally dependent on the buffalo. And the destruction of the buffalo marked the end of the Plains Indians' traditional way of life. And when the buffalo were destroyed, the Indians became dependent on government handouts of food and government annuities or annual cash payments. Okay, so what about the different Indian nations? If you remember, there's different Indian nations. When we talk about the American West, we're mainly talking about the Sioux Indians, but we also have Cheyenne, they're another Indian nation that I can think of. So there's lots of different Indian nations. So the Plains nations were never all combined to fight the US Army. So that meant that they weren't in great numbers because it was only ever one nation. Some nations even fought with the US Army against the Sioux Indians. So, whilst the Sioux were fighting against the US Army, the US Army were being backed up by more Indian nations. And also, whilst the Sioux were fighting the US Army, they continued to fight their traditional enemies as well, so that made it even tougher from them. Okay, so now we've actually covered all of the knowledge we need to go over for this video today. We've gone through 13 different factors, and we've explained how each of these led to the final defeat of the of the Indian way of life. So there's all these slides here containing information on that, and you might need to go through it once or twice, or download the set of notes that go with this video from the website revise at gcsehistory.co.uk just to make sure you've got these key points nailed. So now, do you know your stuff? Here are 4 quick questions based on the content of today's video, just based on a few particular areas. Pause the video here if you like, and scribble down some answers to these questions. If not, carry on watching, we'll do them together. Okay, so the answers. Question 1. So, how did these factors contribute to the destruction of the Indians? How did the railways contribute? Well, the railways meant that more land was sold to homesteaders because they sold off land either side of the railways. So that meant they were more settling on the plains. And also, the railways brought buffalo hunters, and that led to the destruction of the buffalo, which meant the Plains Indians' economy was ruined. Okay, manifest destiny. How did that contribute to the destruction of the Indians? Well, it was a God-given right to occupy the whole of North America. And manifest destiny was also justification for the Indian Wars. It's a way of justifying them. So, the homesteaders now. How did the homesteaders contribute to the destruction of the Indians? Well, let's have a look. They managed to cut down Indians' living space by settling on the plains. And the homesteaders also wanted protection of the US government. And finally, how did the reservations lead to the... Whoops, am I going to squeeze that in? Let's try again. The US government. So how did the reservations lead to the destruction of Indian culture? Final question, question 4. They made the Indians totally under government control. Oh, this is getting a bit scribbly now. So the Indians were totally under government control. Okay, dependent on government handouts. Okay, so these are the answers to these 4 questions based on the content of today's video. Thanks for watching this video today. I do hope you found it useful. If you have, please visit the website revise at gcsehistory.co.uk to view more revision videos like this on Medicine Through Time and American West for GCSE History. This is the last video in the topic American West, so I've actually completed all of the American West videos now, and I'm very pleased with myself. Thanks for watching. See you soon.